I want to welcome everyone to Curious Conversations Speaker Series, sponsored by Indiana Humanities. We are so glad you're here. This is our second talk, and so we are welcome to have Bryan Glover, who is the Vice President and a Board of Trustee for Roberts Settlement. Bryan has directed the organization's efforts to create the Legacy Walk at Roberts Settlement, an outdoor exhibit about Indiana's Black pioneers, a wonderful thing if you haven't gone to see it. He has lived in Noblesville since 2007 and is a descendant of Roberts Settlement's founders. He is a retired small business owner whose career also includes many years as a media and entertainment corporate executive in Los Angeles. In addition to Roberts Settlement, Bryan currently serves on several community boards of directors, including the Noblesville Chamber of Commerce, Hamilton County Community Foundation, Noblesville Diversity Coalition, and the Hamilton County Historical Society. He enjoys biking, golfing, reading, music, and travel, and giving lectures at Prairie. So, without further ado, Bryan Glover.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Prairie, for inviting me here today. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to see such a full house and everybody here to hear the story about Roberts Settlement, and I'm anxious to share it with you. Kind of a show of hands. How many have been to Roberts Settlement out in Jackson Township? Oh, good, great. Let's see if I can click and talk at the same time. I'm not sure how well. Okay, good. Dylan's already told you a lot about me, so I'm not going to bother to repeat a lot of what he said, other than to say that yes, I've been back here since 2007, but I was born and raised in Noblesville. Went to Purdue University, and as he said, I'm a Roberts Settlement descendant. This other stuff is just things that I've done in my career. What I'm kind of doing now, but the biggest thing is I'm currently working at retirement. So I'm trying to figure out how this retirement thing is going to work out, and this Prairie stuff keeps me really busy. The woman seated to my left there, I guess on the right, that's my mother, and I know it's not Mother's Day, but it is Women's History Month. So I'm going to take a minute to honor my mother. She's 95 years old, or 95 years young, I should say. And she's always been an important influence in my life. She is a descendant of Roberts Settlement, the Roberts family, and the Winburn family from Roberts Settlement. And as a matter of fact, she's the oldest known living descendant of Roberts Settlement. Unfortunately, she's in the hospital right now, recuperating from a fall. So she's on my mind tonight, and hopefully she is here in spirit, helping me, guiding me through this evening. She's always been an important influence in my life. Roberts Settlement has always been near and dear to her, even when we were young kids and didn't want to go to the homecoming at Roberts Settlement. We had to go, and I think even though we weren't always paying attention, we were always learning a lot about our history. And then since I've been back in Indiana and working with my sister, we've been going through all these old photographs and papers and stuff, and just learning more about our history. And I'm going to share a lot of that with you here tonight. I will say that I've packed a lot of material into this presentation. I want to try to get through it in 45 to 50 minutes. So I'm going to try to stick to my script and get through it. But if there's any burning question that you need to stop me and I need to answer it, I'll be happy to do that. But otherwise, hopefully we have saved enough time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. Does that sound good? This is kind of a little overview of what we're going to talk about today. I've kind of broken this story down into 4 different themes: roots and migration, progress and perseverance, faith and education, and legacy and footprints. And that kind of follows the themes that we have. Dylan mentioned the Legacy Walk exhibit at Roberts Settlement. That is the way the exhibit is organized. So I've decided to kind of tell the story in those 4 themes. And then at the end, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the new things that are going on at Roberts Settlement. So roots and migration is the first theme we're going to explore. Black pioneers. Before tonight, how many of you knew that black pioneers were a thing? Oh my, it's a great group. It isn't always that way. You're going to hear me use different labels to describe the black pioneers at Roberts Settlement. Besides black pioneers, I will use the terms free people of color or persons of color in my discussion tonight, because free people of color was a label commonly used in colonial times and during the Indiana pioneer period. But you're also going to hear me use the terms mixed race, free blacks, and even outdated words like mulatto and colored when talking about the Robert Settlement pioneers. Let's face it, labels, good or bad as they may be, morph over time and should be used differently depending on the context. So if my terminology isn't clear, please stop me and ask for clarification. Most of the Robert Settlement black pioneers were of mixed racial identity and had been free from slavery long before the Emancipation Proclamation. The term free people of color comes from their mixed racial identity. The origins for free people of color begins in the 17th century colonial Virginia. Let's unpack what it meant to be a free person of color during the colonial period. Partus sequitur ventrum, and I'm not good at Latin, so hopefully I pronounced that correctly. If there's any Latin teachers in the audience, please help me out. But that means that which is born follows the womb. And that was established as part of the 17th century slave codes. Typically, white indentured women were free despite the wretched conditions and treatment they received. Children born to these white indentured women, regardless of their father's free status, were usually going to be free. As time went on, these Virginia-born free people of color began a migration to the North Carolina frontier. In North Carolina, they encountered dwindling numbers of Meherrin, Tuscarora, and other Native American tribes that once occupied the coastal plains of Virginia and North Carolina in much larger numbers. The remaining members of these tribes had survived the onslaught of colonial expansion, and in many instances, they had adopted the customs and practices of white settlers, including marriage between the two groups. It wasn't long before free people of color also began to intermarry and establish families with these Native American tribes. Isabel Wilkerson, in her book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, explains that caste is, and I quote, an artificial construction, a fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups based on ancestry and often immutable, unchangeable traits that would be neutral in the abstract but are ascribed life and death meaning in a hierarchy favoring the dominant caste whose forebears designed it, unquote. So to be a free person of color in colonial times was to be a person who lived in a social and political middle ground between the whites, free whites, and slaves on the other hand. What was behind the initial migration of these free people of color from Virginia to North Carolina? Virginia's growing dependence on slave labor and other restrictive laws affecting free people of color were really important reasons behind their move. The availability of cheaper land in North Carolina and a developing economy was viewed as an opportunity for free people of color to earn better wages for their skills, the skills that they possessed. Lastly, they left to join other Virginia kin who had already moved away. James Roberts is the earliest known ancestor that we can positively confirm from North Carolina. James Roberts was born in 1734. We presume he was born in the area identified by the brown oval, and that area today is Northampton County, North Carolina. You can see from the map that James and many in the Roberts family settled in an area inhabited by the Native American tribes that I mentioned earlier. From everything we know, James was born a free man, one of many free people of color in this region. At his death, James Roberts owned nearly 325 acres of land in Northampton County, North Carolina, and he is my fifth great-grandfather. Free people of color from Virginia and North Carolina began migrating to Ohio and Indiana in the 1820s. The exodus began to pick up steam after numerous slave rebellions like the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831. In southern states, many whites viewed free people of color with suspicion. As a reaction, white colonists continued to impose legal restrictions and social pressures on free people of color who were often perceived to be sympathetic and cooperating with enslaved people, and a general threat to the plantation system and slave economy. Many free people of color had family members who were still in slavery. And some free people of color even owned slaves. James Long Jim Roberts and his cousin Willis Roberts, the grandsons of James Roberts, were two of the earliest pioneers to migrate to Indiana. Willis settled in Rush County and Long Jim in Henry County, maybe 20 to 25 miles from one another. I think of Long Jim and Willis as family scouts, sent to evaluate Indiana as a place where the Roberts and their kin might go if they wished to maintain the few freedoms and liberties they possessed. With the assistance of friendly white neighbors in Indiana and North Carolina, they regularly exchanged letters back and forth concerning progress in the Indiana frontier and conditions in their North Carolina home. In one of the frontier letters from Long Jim to his North Carolina kin, he shared good news about how well he was living in Indiana. Long Jim informs his kin that he was raising hogs and that he had plenty of food to eat. He concludes his letter by saying, quote, he is living the way he wishes to live, unquote. These letters were without a doubt unambiguous signals to those in North Carolina contemplating a potential move to the Indiana frontier. By the way, the red arrow on the map is the actual route traveled from North Carolina to Indiana by the Roberts family. The route was detailed in a letter between Long Jim and Willis in 1830. Willis was homesick for North Carolina and expressed a desire to return home. Willis asked Long Jim for the route back to North Carolina, and Long Jim complied to Willis's request in a letter. The letter included each city, town, and outpost that Willis should travel through for a safe return to Northampton, North Carolina. This is a transcript, you can't see the whole letter, but a transcript of that letter from Long Jim to Willis. Long Jim's directions for the way home was not the main thrust of his letter. The letter was Long Jim's stern warning to Willis that returning to North Carolina was a terrible idea. Long Jim warns him that the conditions in North Carolina have only gotten worse since they left, that there was a real possibility of being snatched by slave hunters and being sold into slavery on this journey. And that when he got home, that his children would be at risk in North Carolina because free people of color were under such threat. Long Jim's words were clear that he no longer trusted many of his former North Carolina neighbors, as the conditions around slavery had created an intolerable situation. Despite the warnings, Willis returned to North Carolina, but it wasn't long before he came back to Indiana for good. I'm going to clear up a common misperception that everyone who settled at Roberts Settlement was a Roberts. Roberts and Walden, or I should say Roberts, is the predominant surname in the early days, but not the only one. Of the first three families to buy land at Roberts Settlement, two were Roberts and one was a Walden, who was from Northampton, North Carolina also, likely a close friend of the Roberts family. Within a few years of the first group came the Brookses, the Winburns, the Sweats, and the Newsomes. All these families originated from the coastal plains region of North Carolina, where the Roberts and Waldens had lived. Like the Roberts, each of these families stayed at the beach settlement in Rush County before ultimately putting down roots in Hamilton County. After 1840, the race was on. These are just some of the families that came to the settlement. I couldn't get them all in the tree, so I'm glad there aren't too many descendants here, because some would be mad at me if I didn't have their family name in here. So when I speak in general about the Roberts family doing this or that, you should know that I am speaking about all the various families at Roberts Settlement. The man in this photo is Peter Roberts. He was born in 1824, just a few years before his father, Elijah Roberts, made the decision to migrate to Indiana. This photo was likely taken in the 1860s or 1870s, when Peter was still a relatively young man, but it is one of the oldest photos that we have in our collection. It's the only photo we have of someone born in North Carolina who came to Indiana. Here's a statistic that'll give you some idea of how few in number free people of color were in the state. There were 11,428, less than 1% of the population of free colored living in Indiana in 1860. 73% of them were in small villages like Roberts Settlement. The number of black pioneers throughout all the 5 states that were once part of the Old Northwest Territory was quite small. These free black pioneers were truly isolated in a variety of ways. This map from the book Bone and Sinew of the Land identifies 338 black farm settlements throughout the Old Northwest Territory for the period 1800 until just prior to the Civil War. Fewer than 20 of these settlements were larger than 400 acres. The backstory for each settlement is not always the same. Many communities were settled by free people of color, much like Roberts Settlement. Others were settled by enslaved blacks who emancipated themselves. And other communities were established by enlightened whites who manumitted their slaves once they arrived in Ohio and Indiana. The important takeaway here is that Roberts Settlement is not unique. When we tell our story, we feel like we are telling the story that sheds light on these other important Black pioneer communities. The next theme is progress and perseverance. This period lasted from the 1830s to the 1880s. In summary, life at Roberts Settlement during the early years was difficult and offered no guarantees of stability or success. Soon after the first families arrived at Roberts Settlement, a national depression hit the entire country. The Panic of 1837 lasted until the mid-1840s. Prices, wages, profits fell. Westward expansion and public improvement stalled. Unemployment rose and pessimism abounded. And if the wilderness and bad economy wasn't enough, racial hostility was never far away in Indiana. It is said that Indiana was both anti-slavery and anti-Black. The 1850s brought ominous warnings that could not have escaped notice by established and newly arriving Roberts families. Fortunately, it seems that the settlers at Roberts Settlement were able to navigate their way through and around the new Constitution and other obstacles. For one thing, most of the families at Roberts Settlement were already firmly established by 1850. They had good relations with their surrounding white neighbors with whom they worked and worshiped together. It's possible and even likely that some of these relationships with surrounding white neighbors extended back to earlier generations in North Carolina and Virginia. After all, the coastal plains region of Virginia and North Carolina was home to many Quakers and Methodists who had earlier migrated to Indiana. After 1851, there were fewer new families moving to the settlement. These late arriving immigrants quickly moved on to Michigan and Wisconsin, where they established communities like the Beach and Roberts Settlement. Before Roberts Settlement, the Robertses and other pioneers established a settlement in Rush County near Knightstown, kind of on the east and a little south of Indianapolis. This community was known as the Beach. The Beach settlement grew quickly, forcing the next wave of new arrivals to look elsewhere for good, inexpensive farmland. Jackson Township in Hamilton County, a former frontier area in the 1830s, was the place they chose. Roberts Settlement's early settlers followed the same strategy as the Beach relatives in that they chose homesteads near Quaker and anti-slavery Methodist neighbors they could count on for peaceful and supportive coexistence. Prospects at Roberts Settlement remained bleak until the 1857 when the Indianapolis-Peru Railroad was opened in nearby Arcadia and Atlanta. The railroad gave area farmers better access to grain and livestock markets, and it brought consumer goods that improved home lives for families. The frame structure you see in the upper left photo was constructed, frame church you see in the upper left-hand photo was constructed in 1858. It replaced a log meeting house that had served as a church, school, and meeting space for about 10 years. Building a church was a clear symbol that the families of Roberts Settlement had come with the intention of staying. The vestibule and belfry that you see in the bottom photo were added in 1914. Another sign of progress was a public school that was built within the Roberts Settlement neighborhood in 1877. Perhaps it's coincidental that school number 5 at Roberts Corner was built after Indiana lifted its ban on funding public education for Black children. Before the school was built, the community operated 2 school sessions each year in the settlement's chapel that doubled as a schoolhouse. It's worth pointing out that several neighboring white children who lived close to schoolhouse number 5 attended school with the Roberts children. This was generally rare in the 1870s, but not necessarily so in very rural, isolated areas like Jackson Township. Joining the Union Army and engaging in local politics, as well as entrepreneurship, were more signs of progress at Roberts Settlement. I'm going to tell you about a few people who came of age during this period of progress, a period that coincides with our country's Civil War and the Reconstruction periods. Let's start with John Newsom. About a dozen men, including John, enlisted to fight for the Union Army. John enlisted under the alias Jasper Newton when he joined the U.S. Colored Troops 31st Regiment that was raised in New York. Why he used an alias and why he joined a New York regiment is unclear. Perhaps he was underage, we're not certain. Preserving the Union and ending slavery was viewed as an important outcome, not only for enslaved people, but also for free people of color, many of whom still felt they were not receiving the Constitution's Bill of Rights. After his military service, John returned to Roberts Settlement to work his family farm that was actually in Adams Township. Adams Township is where Sheridan is. It would have been, today we have US 31, so Roberts Settlement was on the east side of US 31, and where they lived in Adams was right on the west side, but there was no dividing line at that time. Following the Civil War, the men of Robert's settlement wasted little time getting involved with Republican Party politics. In 1880, Eli Roberts, he's the man in the middle there, entered the Republican primary for county recorder. Spoiler alert, Eli lost his primary election bid. Legend has that a quid pro quo was established between Robert's settlement's all-male voting bloc, women could not vote at this time, and the county's all-male Republican leadership. The deal, in essence, was that the party leaders would get voters throughout the county to vote for Eli if the voting men at Robert's settlement would support the party's preferred candidates for other offices. As you might imagine, the party leaders failed to deliver on their end of the deal. And as I said in my spoiler, Eli did not win. Eli's brother, William Penn Roberts, took the local Republican Party to task in an 1880 letter to the Noblesville Ledger. The timing of his letter suggests that he was furious with the white Republican leaders who reneged on their efforts to bring votes for his brother. Not that anything like that goes on today, right? William Penn's point was that colored men had just as much right to ask for a white man's vote as a white man had to ask for his. Further, he said that the colored men had fought bravely to preserve the Union from ruin, thereby earning a place within the local political apparatus. Stephen Roberts, pictured here on the right, obviously, operated a livestock trading business in the county. Stephen worked with Marion Allred and Sam Craig, two local white livestock dealers that provided access to white area farmers with whom he also did business. It was said of Stephen Roberts that he was one of Hamilton County's most respected and widely known livestock dealers. By the way, the woman on the left of this photo is his wife, Nancy Elliott Roberts. She was born in 1852 and is recorded as the first black child born in Noblesville. In 1880, Nancy, then in her late 20s, married Stephen. Our third theme is faith and education. The successes of men and women at Robert's settlement was grounded in their faith, work ethic, and education. I think it's easiest to convey what faith and education meant at Robert's settlement if I share a few of the success stories rooted in faith and education. Before I do that, however, let me share some history about Robert's settlement's connection to the Wesleyan Methodist Church. Interracial worship was generally not a thing in the mid-19th century. For the families at Robert's settlement, however, it wasn't so unusual to worship with fellow anti-slavery Methodists who happened to be white. Free people of color and anti-slavery white Methodists and Quakers were known to worship together in the North Carolina Old Country. In 1838, 9 early Robert settlers and 9 whites in the area formed the Mount Pleasant Methodist Church. They met at the home of Wilson Barker, who lived close to these Robert settlement families. In the late 1840s, the Robert settlement community decided it was time to start their own church that could better serve the growing number of families. The Roberts community built a log meeting house and joined the Westfield Wesleyan Circuit that included Westfield, Boxley, Deming, Tipton, and a few other small communities in the area. Church services were mostly led by a circuit preacher. Revivals with neighboring Wesleyan churches were quite common. Many Roberts men went on to become ordained ministers within the Wesleyan Church. And here's one of them. Cyrus Roberts was one of those who became ordained as a Wesleyan minister. Cyrus was a brother to William Penn and Eli Roberts, whom I mentioned a little earlier. Cyrus served Wesleyan churches in Ontario, Canada, Indianapolis, South Bend, Zanesville, Ohio, Purdy, Tennessee, and other cities. In the spring of 1882, Cyrus and his family ventured to Purdy, Tennessee in McNairy County to assume control of a school established by the Wesleyan Church for the benefit of blacks in the area who were being denied public education. Cyrus and Catherine set forth teaching men, women, and children reading, writing, and other life skills. Cyrus and Catherine renamed the school the Robertsonian Institute for Freedmen. He didn't have an ego or anything like that. Yeah. Throughout their tenure, Cyrus and Catherine experienced hostility from local whites who did not like the idea of educating blacks. Progress was further hampered by a lack of funding from the Wesleyan Church. Cyrus and Catherine served for about 5 years before he resigned in 1877 due to health issues. During the time he was ill, his wife, Catherine, took over most of his teaching and pastoral duties. Dolphin Roberts was a medical doctor and a minister. While living in Washington, D.C., Dolphin was appointed to serve as recorder of land deeds in Washington, D.C. by President Benjamin Harrison. We have come across a couple of newspaper articles that suggest Dolphin was on the front lines of fighting for civil rights. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, racial tensions were very high in cities with significant black populations. Violent white mobs terrorized blacks in cities like Wilmington, North Carolina, Springfield, Illinois, just to name a few. Whites destroyed vibrant and successful black communities within these cities to make the point that black independence and economic success should only go so far. During the Springfield, Illinois riot in 1908, Dolphin, now living in Chicago, urged his congregation at Quinn Chapel AME to prepare to fight back should rioters come to their neighborhoods in Chicago. Dolphin exhorted his congregation to arm themselves and protect their families and protect their property from anyone intent on destroying black neighborhoods and businesses. His rationale was that the federal government was unwilling to protect black people, so citizens should prepare to protect themselves. There were several instances where he gave similar speeches of this nature. Dolphin came back to Indiana in the early 1910s after the AME Church assigned him to Bethel AME in Indianapolis, the home church of Madam C.J. Walker when she was living in Indianapolis, building her magnificent business empire. He pastored to her for a couple of years. Dolphin received various assignments within the AME Church and was known to be a very competent manager, capable of getting churches' fiscal houses in order. Everybody familiar with the AMEs, African Methodist Episcopal Church? Okay. I didn't want to assume. Ezra Roberts. Ezra was from Kokomo, but his parents were born and raised at Roberts Settlement. Ezra earned his degree from Butler College, now Butler University. And while he was at Butler, he was an exceptional student and competed as part of the school's debate team. In 1905 or 1906, Ezra attended a 25th anniversary program for Tuskegee Institute and its founder, Booker T. Washington. The program so inspired Ezra that he wrote a letter to Mr. Washington seeking a teaching job at Tuskegee. Ezra's letter must have been persuasive. Washington offered him a teaching job that Ezra immediately accepted, leaving behind what was probably a good teaching job within the Indianapolis public school system. After a few years at Tuskegee, Ezra was placed in charge of academics for the Tuskegee Institute. His wife, Amelia Cromwell Roberts, a New Yorker whom he met at Tuskegee, was the head of the physical education for women. She was a pioneer in the development of athletics for women at black colleges. Ezra and Amelia are both buried at Tuskegee University in graves not far from Booker T. Washington's gravesite. I recently received this photo from my sister, so I just threw it in the presentation last night. Our persistence with Tuskegee University, with their archivists, has finally yielded a dividend. We've been writing to them and calling them and trying to find out more about Ezra and Amelia, and finally we got a picture from a yearbook that they were able to find for us. This is a picture of Amelia in the center, the one on the right, and she's the Coach Amelia, I call her, and with her basketball team on the left-hand side there. Marcus Gilliam. Marcus began teaching at Roberts Settlement when he was 15 years old. Later on in his early life, Marcus also taught at the Noblesville Colored School. In addition to graduating from Valparaiso College, Marcus obtained his doctorate degree from Cornell University in New York. His teaching career spanned the states of Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, New York, and Missouri. In St. Louis, Marcus served as principal of the Waring School, a segregated colored elementary school. Marcus's second wife, Hortense Parker, pictured here, also left a legacy. Hortense's father is John Parker, and he bought his freedom from his Virginia enslaver, and he moved to Ripley, Ohio, where he started up a foundry and received several patents for his inventions. Hortense was one of the first black students to study at Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, now Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. She studied music and taught at many of the black schools alongside her husband, Marcus. Much has been written and recorded about the men of Roberts Settlement, but the endeavors of women, unfortunately, received far fewer headlines. No laughing. Oh, yeah. I knew you would be. Adora Knight is one of the women that our genealogist has diligently researched to establish a record of her life and accomplishments. Adora was the first African American to graduate from Muncie High School. She acquired her teacher training at Indiana State Normal, which is Indiana State University now, in Terre Haute. And for 40 years, Adora was an educator and spent most of her life teaching primary grades at Lincoln School, an all-black school in Terre Haute. She also served as a principal at Dunbar School in Terre Haute. More about researching the women a little bit later. I'll try to redeem myself. It's not you. Okay. And the final theme is legacy and footprints. As the 1900s approached, younger generations of well-prepared Robertses took their skills and abilities beyond the settlement, ushering in a permanent downsizing of their rural farm community. Urbanization, farming mechanization, and a host of other factors led to a shrinking of rural communities throughout the country. Robert Settlement's fate was not any different. Even though the community had become smaller, the connections descendants had with the settlement and each other would never fade away, and the legacy of accomplishment remained a source of pride for all to celebrate year after year. These maps will give you some idea of how Robert Settlement shrunk over time. Here are some numbers for you to consider. In 1870, there were 35 households and 206 people living at Robert Settlement. By 1880, it had grown to 51 households and 266 people. That was kind of the high water mark for the settlement. By 1910, the settlement had shrunk to 29 households and 104 people. And by 1920, there were only 25 households and 107 people, a 60% decline from 1880. So where did they go? This map shows some of the places where second and third generation Roberts descendants went in pursuit of their dreams and their aspirations. Skilled and professional job opportunities close to home were often off limits to blacks, even for the Roberts men and women who were well liked by local whites. It's no secret that these jobs, where they existed, were reserved for white men. And in some cases, such as school teachers, white women were also able to apply. The young and talented Roberts men and women found other options that suited them just fine. As beneficiaries of good education, strong work ethic, and a highly supportive community, these younger Robertses were well positioned to be leaders in emerging black communities, seeking bright young talent to serve the needs of growing black communities in places like Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, and Philadelphia. This slide here will kind of give you an idea of some of the careers that people went into. It should be no surprise that preaching and teaching were probably the two most popular professions for the men and women of Robert Settlement. This is not a complete list, but these are several of our noted pastors, many of our teachers. As a matter of fact, Byron Armstrong was added to the Westfield Hall of Fame recently. So if any of you are Westfield graduates and you go to the high school, you'll find his plaque with his likeness on it over there. But many exceptional teachers from Robert Settlement that went on to teach in many places. And then the other professions that they chose were things like medicine, several doctors in the family, law, politics, and public service. And I'm going to talk specifically about some of these people as part of the legacy in the next several slides. And then there were farmers, chemists, construction, and even auto racing. I'll tell you about that one in a minute. By 1920, only a couple of dozen farms remained at Robert Settlement. Nonetheless, those that worked the land will always be an important part of our Robert Settlement legacy. Ira Rice, pictured at left, and his brother on the other side, that's James Rice, inherited the land originally acquired by Hansel Roberts, one of our founders. Ira acquired additional parcels from small land-holding descendants to become the largest landholder at Robert Settlement in the early 1900s. James and Ira both attended Purdue University and studied agriculture. Both men likely entered Purdue without revealing their racial identity. Recent efforts by Purdue University to identify the earliest black students at Purdue do not include either Rice brother. After college, James took a job as a chemist for a Pennsylvania steel company. Professional jobs like chemist in the early 1900s would have been off limits to non-whites. James probably relied on his ability to pass for white when he applied for the job. Family history tells us that James' deception was ultimately discovered by a coworker, and he was terminated because of his racial identity. After this experience, James returned to Robert Settlement to take up farming with his brother. The newspaper article in the middle of the slide appeared in the 1947 edition of the Pittsburgh Courier, a black-owned newspaper based in Pittsburgh. And it's a story about the Rice brothers and tells of the success they were having raising cattle and the level of sophistication of their farming operation. Milton Roberts, he was a brother to Dolphin Roberts, the one I spoke about earlier, who was the doctor and the preacher. One of the earliest highlights from Milton's life was being part of a local Republican organizing committee responsible for bringing Frederick Douglass to Noblesville in 1880. Douglass came to Noblesville as part of a campaign stop for presidential candidate James Garfield. It's hard to establish a timeline for Milton's move to Iowa, but sometime between 1880 and 1885, we think Milton completed his law studies and moved his family to Ottumwa. Any Iowans here? Did I say that right? I think it's Ottumwa, Iowa. Why Iowa? We don't know for sure. One hypothesis is that Milton believed that his well-known racial identity meant that his future as a lawyer in the local area would always be limited because he was colored. Like James Rice, moving far away would allow him to hide his racial identity, something he could not easily do in Hamilton County. It is impossible to know if Milton made a conscious decision to pass as white. We are fairly sure that Milton never returned to Roberts Settlement after his move to Iowa. We also know that another brother and a sister moved away to Iowa. All of them appear to have taken a white identity. In 1899, in partnership with the Reverend U.B. Smith, a Methodist minister, Judge Roberts organized the American Home Finding Association, the oldest adoption organization in Iowa. Milton was the president of the organization until he died. The good news is that one of his great-great-great-nephews, who's very interested in genealogy, discovered his connection to Roberts Settlement and comes back regularly for our homecoming. So we have been able to reestablish connections with part of the Iowa Roberts family, but not anyone directly in Milton's line at this point. So hopefully, with the technology and everything we're doing, somebody will surface soon. Adelbert Roberts, he was born in Decatur, Van Buren County in Michigan in 1867. Adelbert's father grew up at the Beach Settlement and moved to Van Buren, Michigan, where he married Parthenia Winburn. You hear the same names cropping up in different places, whose family had also located to Michigan. In 1924, Adelbert Roberts became Illinois' first African-American state senator when he was appointed to an unexpired term. He made history again in 1926 when he was elected in his own right. His experience in the law and his skill as an orator helped him become the first African-American to chair a Senate committee when he took the gavel for the Criminal Procedures Committee in 1927. Re-elected in 1930, Senator Roberts was part of the fight for legislation which outlawed discrimination on state public works building contracts. During his time as a state senator, Roberts attended Roberts Settlement homecomings and spoke to his Indiana family about the important topics concerning African Americans at the time. If you ever visit the Illinois State House, you will find a statue of Adelbert Roberts III in the Illinois Capitol Rotunda. Dr. Carl Roberts is arguably the most well-known Roberts Settlement descendant. Carl is the grandson of founder Elijah Roberts. Elijah is my third great-grandfather. And as the youngest son, his father, Jonathan, wanted him to take up farming. Carl had other ideas. He left home to live with his sister in Grant County, which is where Marion, Indiana is located. And after graduating from high school, Carl pursued his dream of becoming a doctor. Carl graduated from Valparaiso College and then went on to the Chicago School of Medicine, which is now part of University of Loyola, for his medical training, Loyola Chicago. Carl was the first president of the National Medical Association, the equivalent of the American Medical Association for black doctors. Black doctors couldn't join the American Medical Association. He also served as president of the Chicago chapter of the NAACP for a short period of time. Carl is largely responsible for organizing the family records and creating the first Roberts family tree that continues to serve as a basis for what we know about our Roberts ancestry. He is my second great uncle. So the question is, did he or didn't he? Robert Lee Wallace, the arrow there, was a mechanic and a race car driver. Car racing was not on the list of careers Bobby's parents had in mind for their son. After all, his father was a prominent AME elder, and his mother was a teacher. In the early days of car racing, blacks were not allowed to compete against white race car drivers. During the 1920s, blacks formed their own racing league called the Golden Glories Racing Circuit. Bobby was a successful driver on the circuit. However, he did not limit himself to the black racing circuit. He was known to spend a lot of time in the garages at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway amongst the white racing teams. Bobby's fair-skinned complexion probably would have allowed him to pass and move freely in places where other darker-skinned drivers and mechanics could not go. Deacon Litz, the red arrow, okay, was a driver that Bobby has been linked to. I am reasonably certain that the man standing to the left in the top photo is Bobby Wallace, and the man behind the wheel is Deacon. Unofficial accounts state that Bobby took relief laps for Deacon Litz in the 1934 Indianapolis 500. There is no official Indy 500 record that confirms Bobby's participation in the race. There is a 1932 record of a W. Leroy Wallace, who registered as a mechanic. Could this have been our Bobby Wallace using an alias? We may never know the answer to these questions, but we continue to search for clues that may prove the legend of Bobby Wallace at the Indianapolis 500. Who knows who the first black race car driver was at the Indy 500? Willie T. Ribbs, 1991. I had a prize here, but nobody's going to get it. From raising kids and educating them to tending to the farm, nursing the sick, and managing the church, the women of Robert's settlement took command of everything. Martha Lucetta Gilliam, the woman pictured in all three photos here, but the young woman in the middle, was just one of those women. As I said earlier, it's easier to find the written record about the men of Robert's settlement than it is the women. Dr. Jasmine Sutton, a history professor at the University of Miami, Ohio, once told me that the stories of the Roberts settlement women are not as hard to find as I might think. She told me that their stories will be found in less obvious places and may take a little more imagination to construct. She was right. The women at Roberts settlement wrote essays as students, sermons for church. They kept personal and financial journals for their families. They put together the photo album, scribbling notes on the back of these pictures before gluing them in a photo album. And they are also the ones that collected and saved the family heirlooms. And so in all these places, there are bits and pieces of their stories that can be stitched together to give a fuller picture of their lives. By the way, Lucetta lived to be 102 years old. She died in 1976. And the woman dressed in black in the leftmost picture is Alzadia Winburn, my great-great-grandmother. She was the sister of Dr. Carl Roberts. She was born just a couple of years before Lucetta, and she lived to the ripe old age of 92. I should be so lucky. Let's fast forward to today and what's happening at Roberts Settlement. The chapel and cemetery remain as enduring symbols of this once thriving community. A couple of families continue to own land purchased by their ancestors, and their land is still under cultivation through contracts with local farmers. Every July, the Roberts Settlement descendants continue to have an annual family reunion at the chapel. Our reunion, known as the Roberts Settlement Homecoming, has occurred every year since it began in 1924. Through the most difficult of times, the celebration has taken place without fail. Even during COVID, we managed to have virtual celebrations to keep our tradition alive. This group photo serves to document our annual gathering. This was the 100th, and not everybody made it in the picture, but there were probably 300 people there that day. That's about double what it usually is. So why should I visit Roberts Chapel now that I've seen this presentation today? I bet you're asking yourself that question, right? I've got a very simple answer for you. Roberts Settlement, more specifically the Roberts Chapel Church and the cemetery, it's a beautiful location in the northern part of Hamilton County, full of history with this fabulous new exhibit, the Legacy Walk at Roberts Settlement. I'm sure you say that here at Conner Prairie all the time with all the new exhibits that you have here too. A reason to come back. We have worked very hard to make the Legacy Walk a reality. We have had tremendous community and national support for our project. We'll be very proud and honored to share our story with you in the place where our history was made. We want you to come and experience what we have to offer. The exhibit is free and always available to the public. The chapel is only open by appointment. So if you are part of a group that would like to come out, please contact us through our website, and we'd be happy to arrange a visit and open the chapel and let you hear this story all over again. So what's coming soon, right? So we got phase 1 of the exhibit done, and now we're working on phase 2. And we're going to implement a web app called Story, S-T-Q-R-Y. It's based off of QR codes. And within Story, we will have animation videos, biographies, and other content for you to learn more about the Robert Settlement history. Our goal is to get this app up by July before our homecoming this year, so please wish me luck. I'm probably behind schedule right now. And then we also are going to be launching a capital campaign for preserving and restoring our historic chapel. The chapel was built, as I said, in 1858. It's 167 years old, and it's showing its age in many ways. The belfry and the chimney need critical repairs. Windows and siding need replacing. HVAC and audio capabilities need substantial upgrades. So we ask that you stay tuned to our social media for other announcements, and if you'd like to help us accomplish our goals, we would greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to end with a few takeaways, the things that I'd like you to, hopefully that you got from this, this last 45 minutes or so, about things that I think are important in the Robert Settlement story. Color mattered in a society that used race to create and maintain barriers. Even though the Roberts family may have had lots of advantages, they too faced their share of discrimination in North Carolina, as well as when they came to Indiana. But their unwavering faith and their commitment to education were necessary to overcome these obstacles that were imposed by a hostile society that was often hostile to that progress. Nothing was more important than the family bonds combined with the stable, supportive institutions they had created as foundations for generations of future Roberts descendants. This strong sense of community really mattered to them and was part of the keys to their success, that mutual support. And the ability to maintain and nurture relationships with white co-religionists that shared similar values was a significant benefit. They were very strategic in almost every place where these settlements were established, these larger settlements, choosing who your neighbor is going to be and choosing people that would not necessarily interfere in what they were doing, but they knew that they could count on when they needed them. And lastly, free status and the ownership of property afforded a limited range of opportunities not available to formerly enslaved persons. I think it supports what we know about being able to build generational wealth, being able to have wealth, the things that you can do if you have wealth. They had an advantage over people who had come out of slavery who came with nothing. Certainly gave them an advantage for several generations. And that's all I have for you tonight. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for listening. You're probably wondering where that QR code goes. If you'd like to give a donation, we'd be more than happy to accept it, and you can do it to that, or later on, if you want to go to our website, we would greatly appreciate any support that you're able to give to us. But with all that, and we are a 501c13 corporation, which is a burial association because we still have an active cemetery, but it is a tax-deductible donation in case you're curious. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions that you have. Norman.
Bryan, you mentioned your descendants who had to go to other areas and take on a different identity as white. I was really struck by the Green story, the personal librarian, and how going from a black family in Washington, D.C., choosing to identify as white to be J.P. Morgan's personal librarian. And it strikes me that story was so properly told that the Robert Settlement story could similarly be told. Have you thought about that?
Not necessarily in that way. I do think that there are probably way more instances of that happening than even what I've identified here. I mean, when you look at these early generations of families that came, most of them had 10 to 12 children. Now, maybe not all of them lived to adulthood, but they all went somewhere, and only a small fraction of them are still connected to Robert Settlement. And we often meet people, two sisters came a couple years ago for the first time on their way on a cross-country trip. And they've been aware of their connection to Robert Settlement for a long, long time. And they knew as much about their ancestors as we knew about that ancestor. And they were finally ready to embrace that connection, right? So we have to meet people where they are. But I would say at least 25 to 30% of the the new people who reach out to us, maybe a quarter, have been identifying as white for several generations. And so we try as much to incorporate their story. Sometimes they bring something about a branch of family that we knew nothing about because of the time that they left. But other times we already know a lot about them. We're just glad to welcome them into the family. So you probably noticed from looking at that 100th anniversary picture, it's a mosaic of melanin in our family, and the way people identify varies from family to family, but we all share this common ancestry. So I've never really, I think I brought it up enough times that, it's definitely part of our story, okay? So I was trying to figure out how to tell it sometimes. It's different. I'll have to talk to you offline, and maybe you can point me to some resources that might help me think about a different way to tell this story too. Yes?
Often I tell you a story during we have here at Prairie, Hamilton Southeastern School. They come here and learn about the Underground Railroad and things like that. And I was under the impression, I want you to correct me because I want to make sure I'm telling the children the correct thing. When Elijah and I believe it was Gresham Roberts, when they came from North Carolina.
Hansel. The first three were Elijah, Hansel, and Micaiah Walden.
Okay, who was Elijah married to?
He was married to Keziah Corbin.
Okay, because I had the wrong name.
Keziah, yes. Hansel was married. Don't get me started.
Anyway, Elijah, wasn't he the one, him and his family, they came here in 1836?
So there's a lot. Somehow, some way, someone began to tell the story that Elijah Roberts was the founder of Roberts Settlement, right? So they all, if you look at the paperwork at the land deed office, they all signed for their land on the same day in 1835. My guess is, and there are others here who may know more about the way land was settled. I have a feeling they were here even before that, found their land, has begun to improve it before they went and plunked down their money, right? Hoping that they got it purchased before someone came out and snatched it from underneath them. But those three men and their wives bought the land on the same day, and probably came from where they were at the beach settlement, probably came to Hamilton County at the same time. So to be accurate and to make everybody happy, we say that those three are our founders because they did buy the land all on the same date.
Now, were they farmers?
Yes. Hansel was the biggest landowner. He bought about 400 acres. Whereas the other two men, I think one bought 120 and one bought 80. Land was $1.25 an acre in 1835. But you still needed $100, and that was probably a lot of money at that time to buy land. So you bought 400 acres. That was significant. But Hansel really was the patriarch, I would say, because if you read a lot of these old Wesleyan journals and newspapers, it always mentions Brother Hansel Roberts, as if he is the one representing Roberts Settlement in all these Wesleyan meetings. It never mentions Micaiah or Elijah. I don't know if that doesn't mean they were there, but it only mentions Elijah. And we kind of take that to mean that he was sort of seen as the patriarch, right? But that's about all we know. There's just not a lot of written records about those earliest days.
I have another question.
Sure.
In 1851, when here in the state of Indiana, they don't want blacks and mulattoes to live here, the Roberts were already here. Did they have to sign anything saying
Yeah. Hamilton County was one of those counties that did not require blacks to register after that 1851 Constitution. So, things were kind of selectively enforced. I think in the southern counties, more cases than not, they did require them to register and post bond, but Hamilton County did not require that. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with that early settlement of Hamilton County with the Quakers and these anti-slavery Methodists. And they were also in Noblesville and other places too. They didn't seem to want to do, had no desire to do that. So no, they did not. But I'm sure they were well aware of these new laws and these new restrictions. And one of the reasons why I think that those families moved on to Wisconsin and to Michigan is because once there was no longer land available within that community, they didn't want to live outside of it. So they moved on to the next frontier and established their own community because it was important for them to be close to one another, and that was also a means of protection too. Yes?
Along those same lines with the 1841 Constitution, and we talk about that a lot, so that's part of why we're focusing. Is there any indication, written or oral tradition, that there was opposition to that and that they were kind of advancing some sort of political opposition or planning their leaving because of the environment here?
I don't think there was, when I talked about them building the church and the schools, now the school was long after that, but the church was built, they had no intention of leaving. They had family well established at the beach settlement. So these larger settlements, it was harder for communities to drive them away. There's a book called The Geography of Hate, and I recommend that you read that if you're interested in this topic. And this is this woman I think now teaches at Purdue University, but she was a University of Illinois doctoral candidate when she wrote this book. But it talks about, and this is again later, but from the migration from the late 1800s and then the Great Migration for World War I, how blacks that went into some of these other communities where they were small in number, how difficult it was for them to stay there, right? They were driven out and then essentially erased as having ever been there. And she explores that topic, kind of dispelling the notion that blacks had moved here to work in factories and things in the big cities. They really came from the South to maintain this agrarian lifestyle they knew, but they were not welcome. But it was, Robert settlement, even the community of Noblesville had a large black community. Part of another branch of my family settled in Noblesville in the 1840s. And at one point, there were over, I tell people this, in the early 1900s, there were over 300 African Americans living in Noblesville. People that don't know this. So it was hard to move people out of those communities, but you could go into, I don't mean to pick on Clinton County, but where there were only 3 or 4 people, it was very easy to chase them out. Yeah. Yes?
I'm curious about your own personal journey of discovery of your heritage here and understanding where you're from, but how did that interest grow?
Yeah, well, if anyone in the room knows Brenda Myers, they know that she used to be the CEO of Hamilton County Tourism, and she was. I kind of got started with this during Indiana's bicentennial, and she came. I'd only been here a few years, and I knew Brenda, and she says, "Well, what are you going to do what's Robert Settlement going to do for the bicentennial?" And I'm like, hell, I don't know. I'm not even thinking about it. I wasn't even on the board. I just came to the homecoming in those days, right? And so because of my background in the movie industry, now I'm a finance person, not a creative person. The only thing I knew to do was, let's make a film. So she helped us raise the money, and we did. I got involved with Steve Vincent, who is the historian, who I should have given him more props. Steve Vincent is he's a Noblesville native son. He and I graduated from high school together, but he did his graduate thesis on Robert Settlement and the beach settlement, and then he turned it into a book for his doctoral program. And so I called him up, hadn't talked to him in years, and said, hey, how do you feel about helping me make a film? And I happened to catch him on the right day, and he came to Indiana. We reconnected after we hadn't seen each other since high school. And that was really how I got started doing this. I really had no intention. So even though I presented all this, I really should have given more credit to Steve. My sister Leslie, who is the genealogist for the family, she's the one who does all the hard work. And I'm the one who gets way too much credit. But she lives in North Carolina, so she's not able to do these. But we were talking about the women's history. She did a great presentation at the, and I'm not answering your question, but I'm going to digress a little bit. She did a presentation last year during Juneteenth about that woman Alzadia that I mentioned earlier, Alzadia Winburn, and she pieced together all of this story from photographs, sermons, journals, all these things, and she told a great story. I mean, the book she put together on her life is like this thick, right? So, you know, I get to take all that stuff and sort of synthesize it down and talk about it, maybe because I like to talk. And so, you know, I just sort of got sucked into this, right? And that's probably a bad word. I got drawn into this, and now I'm hooked on it. And I don't want to do the hard work, but I love to come and talk about the story, and I'm very proud of my family. I'm very proud of what they accomplished and how they did this, and it's important for me to share it, and that's sort of how I got involved. I keep trying to uninvolve, but get uninvolved, but haven't found out how to do that yet. Okay. You're welcome. Yes?
I hate to bring this up, but how did you all get along when the Ku Klux Klan was such a big thing in Indiana?
You know, I think that's another one of these things where, according to Steve, what he tells me, and he doesn't really talk too much about it in the book, but he says that, you know, the 1920s, when the Klan had reemerged, it began to change relationships between folks who were still at Roberts Settlement and people in that surrounding community. Now, I think there have been changes, and there were, you know, these weren't all the same original families who lived there. Although, if you look around that part of Hamilton County, there are a lot of them that still own their land and still live there. But he said it did change the relationship. But there were so many other things happening at that time. I don't think it, and the community had shrunk by over 60-70% there. I don't think that it had a huge impact, but it was something they were very aware of. It's something everybody was very aware of. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your attention tonight.
Yes, give it up for Bryan. That was a lovely... Before you all go, I want to thank you all for coming again. But if you want to hear more from Bryan, we have a new podcast coming out. This is Reclamation, and I'm told that Bryan's episode is coming out in 3 weeks. Is that correct? That is correct. So look for that where you get all your podcasts. This is Reclamation. It's our new podcast focused on, well, not focused, but tied to our new Promised Land as Proving Ground exhibit, which is open this year. So come out and visit it. It tells the story of African Americans in Indiana throughout Indiana history. So it's a wonderful exhibit for you to get through and learn some stuff. I want to invite you to 2 of our upcoming presentations. May 13th at 7 p.m. here. Dr. R. Douglas Hurt will be here from Purdue talking about 19th century agriculture. So tying into a lot of those things that we talk about when you come out on the grounds in Prairie Town. And speaking of the Klan, on July 15th at 7 at the Hamilton County Historic Courthouse, Dr. James H. Madison is going to be speaking on resistance to the Klan and how average day people were pushing back against the growing influence of that hate group. So we invite you to come to those. Those are also free and open to the public. You can find those online. Feel free to come up and look at some of these books that Bryan has brought. They're great if you're looking for your next read and you want to learn some more. But once again, give it up for Bryan, and thank you for coming.